Ryan stood in the doorway like he already owned the place. His eyes moved slowly across the living room, the vaulted ceiling, the polished hardwood floors, the long windows catching the late afternoon light. And then he smiled. Not politely, not appreciatively, possessively. "It's beautiful," he said almost under his breath, like he was confirming something to himself. Then louder with a glance at his wife, "Megan's going to love this. We're moving in." Megan didn't hesitate. She walked past him, heels clicking against the floor, already scanning the space with a critical eye. "The upstairs corner room gets the best light," she said, pointing as if she'd been here a dozen times. "That'll be ours. The guest room can be storage. And we'll probably need to redo the kitchen, open it up a bit." Ryan nodded, already moving toward the hallway. "Yeah, and we can turn the basement into an office. Plenty of room down there." Then he paused, glanced back at me like I'd just crossed his mind. "You can take the small room by the stairs. It's quieter." I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I stood there, hands lightly resting on the back of my chair, and listened as they divided my home into neat little pieces that fit their lives perfectly. When they were done, when Megan finally stopped talking long enough to take a breath, I looked Ryan straight in the eye and said one word. "No." His smile disappeared. Not slowly, instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. And for the first time since they walked in, the house was silent. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 55 years old, and I've lived in this house for over 20 years. Every wall, every floorboard, every inch of it was paid for long before I ever married Daniel. Before Ryan ever stepped foot through that door. This isn't just a house to me. It's where I built my life quietly, steadily, without asking anyone for permission. I'm not someone who raises her voice. I don't slam doors or throw words around like weapons. I've found over time that the quieter you are, the more people reveal themselves. And that afternoon, Ryan and Megan revealed everything. Daniel sat at the dining table the entire time, hands folded, eyes shifting between his son and the grain of the wood beneath his fingers. He hadn't said a word. Not when Ryan announced they were moving in. Not when Megan started assigning rooms. Not even when I said no. That told me more than anything else. Megan recovered first. She let out a small laugh, the kind people use when they think something must be a misunderstanding. "Oh, Evelyn, I think you might have taken that the wrong way," she said, smoothing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're not trying to impose. We just thought, with all this space, it makes sense. It'll be good for everyone." Ryan nodded quickly, stepping in. "Yeah, the house is huge, Ev. It's too much for one person. We'd be helping you out." Helping me. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up my coffee cup, and took a slow sip. It had gone lukewarm, but I didn't mind. I turned back to them, setting the cup down with a soft, deliberate sound. "I understood you perfectly," I said, "and my answer is still no." The air shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Enough for Megan's smile to tighten at the corners. Enough for Ryan's posture to stiffen. Daniel finally cleared his throat. "Evelyn," he began, but the word didn't go anywhere. It just hung there, unfinished. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Ryan. "This house isn't up for discussion," I continued calmly. "Not today, not next month, not at all." Ryan let out a breath through his nose, the kind that carried more frustration than he wanted to show. "You're overreacting," he said. "We're family. This is what families do." "No," I replied just as evenly. "This is what people do when they've already made a decision without asking." Megan crossed her arms, her tone sharpening just a little. "We're trying to plan ahead. My lease is up in 6 weeks and my mom might need a place too. We can't just wait around forever." There it was. Not just them. More people, more plans, all built neatly on top of something that didn't belong to them. I nodded once, absorbing it, filing it away. "Then you should make arrangements that don't involve my house." Ryan's jaw tightened. "You don't even want to consider it." "I already did," I said. The answer didn't change. For a moment, no one spoke. The late afternoon light had shifted, stretching longer across the floor, catching the edges of the furniture in a warm glow that felt almost out of place in the tension building in the room. Megan picked up her purse a little too quickly. "Okay," she said, forcing another smile, thinner this time. "Maybe we just need to revisit this when everyone's had time to think." Ryan didn't move right away. He looked at me, really looked this time as if trying to figure out if I meant it, if I was serious. I held his gaze. I didn't soften it, I didn't explain. Eventually, he nodded once short and tight and turned toward the door. Daniel stood halfway hesitating, then followed them out without another word. I listened to the front door open then close. The sound echoed through the house more than it should have. For a few seconds I stood exactly where I was, letting the silence settle back into place. Then I walked over, picked up my coffee cup again and carried it to the sink. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. What I felt was something colder, clearer. They hadn't asked, they hadn't suggested, they had decided. And that told me this wasn't a conversation that had just started. It was one that in their minds had already been finished. I rinsed the cup, set it carefully in the rack, and dried my hands on a clean towel. Outside I could hear the faint sound of a car engine starting, then fading as it pulled away. I knew they'd be back. People who assume they're entitled to something don't walk away after one no. They adjust, they push. They look for a different angle. That was fine. I wasn't going anywhere either. And if they thought that house, the one I built, the one I maintained, the one I protected, was something they could simply step into and take over, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. They didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. That in itself told me something had shifted, but not in the way most people might think. Silence, when it follows entitlement, is rarely surrender. It's recalculation. By the fourth day, I had already adjusted my routine without realizing it. I locked the front door even when I was home. I kept my phone within reach more often than usual, not out of fear, out of awareness. On Thursday morning just after 10, my phone lit up with Ryan's name. I let it ring twice before answering. Yes. Hey, he said, voice carefully neutral. I think things got a little heated the other day. They didn't, I replied. They were very clear. A pause. I could almost hear him adjusting his tone. Look, Megan didn't mean to come across like that. She just gets excited when she sees potential. In someone else's house, I asked, not sharply, just precisely. He exhaled. Evelyn, come on, that's not fair. What isn't fair, I said, is planning a life inside a space that isn't yours. Another pause, longer this time. We're trying to be practical, he said finally. Rent's gone up again. It doesn't make sense for us to keep throwing money away when there's all this space sitting unused. Unused. I glanced around the living room, the chair by the window where I read in the mornings, the side table with a stack of books I hadn't finished yet, the framed photographs that marked years of quiet, ordinary moments. Just because something isn't useful to you, I said, doesn't mean it's unused. His voice tightened slightly. You know what I mean? I do, I said, and I still mean what I said. The call ended shortly after that, not abruptly, not dramatically, just unresolved. That afternoon I went about my day as usual. I watered the plants in the backyard, checked the mail, folded a small load of laundry. There's a rhythm to maintaining a home alone, a steady, predictable sequence of small tasks that keep everything in order. I've always found comfort in that. It was just past 3 when I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't rush to the window. I didn't need to. I already knew who it was. The knock came a moment later, 3 quick taps, confident, not tentative. I walked to the door and opened it. Megan stood there, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, 2 large cardboard boxes at her feet. She smiled, bright and practiced. Hi, Evelyn, she said, like we were picking up from a pleasant conversation. I was in the neighborhood. Of course she was. I didn't step aside. What do you need, Megan? Oh, it's nothing big, she said, bending slightly to gesture at the boxes. Just a few things from my mom's place. Some of her kitchen stuff, a few clothes. We're still sorting everything out, and I figured the basement here would be perfect just for a few days. She said it quickly, smoothly, as if the details would carry the decision with them. No, I said. She blinked just once. It's temporary. No, I repeated just as evenly. Her smile faltered, but only for a second. Ryan said you might need a little time to adjust, but this really isn't a big deal. It's just storage. What's a big deal, I replied, is bringing your belongings to my house without permission. She straightened, the brightness in her expression dimming slightly. I am asking. No, I said again. For a moment we stood there facing each other. The late afternoon sun caught the edge of the boxes, casting long shadows across the porch. Then, without another word, she stepped forward just enough to push one of the boxes past the threshold with her foot. It was a small movement, Subtle, but deliberate. I'll just leave these here for now, she said, already turning slightly as if the decision had been made. We'll move them downstairs later. I reached down, gripped the edge of the box, and slid it back out onto the porch. The cardboard scraped softly against the floor. No, you won't. She looked at me, really looked this time. The politeness was still there, but thinner now, strained. Evelyn, she said, lowering her voice, I don't understand why you're making this so difficult. I'm not, I replied. I'm making it clear. Her jaw tightened. We're family. Then act like it, I said. Family doesn't assume. Family asks and listens when the answer is no. For a second I thought she might argue. Push harder. That would have been easier to deal with. Instead, she stepped back, crossing her arms, her expression cooling into something more controlled. Fine, she said. I'll talk to Ryan. I expect you will. She picked up her sunglasses, slid them back into place, and turned toward her car. The door shut a little harder than necessary. The engine started, then faded as she pulled away. I stood there for a moment longer, then bent down, lifted one of the boxes, and set it neatly to the side under the small overhang by the porch. If it rained, it wouldn't get wet. I didn't open them. I didn't need to know what was inside. Ownership isn't determined by contents. It's determined by permission. Inside the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet I understood. I walked back to the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. The same table Ryan had stood beside days earlier, already deciding how it would fit into his version of this house. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle. At 5:12, my phone buzzed again. Ryan. I answered. What did you do? He asked immediately. The neutrality from before gone. I moved 2 boxes back outside, I said. They're under the porch, they'll stay dry. You can't just leave them out there, he snapped. Those are Megan's mom's things. And this, I replied calmly, is my house. A sharp exhale on the other end. You're being unreasonable. No, I said, I'm being consistent. He was quiet for a moment, then, we're coming by later. That won't change anything. We'll see. The line went dead. I set the phone down gently and looked out the window toward the driveway, now empty again. They were adjusting just like I knew they would, pushing from a different angle. That was fine. So was I. Because while they were still trying to figure out how far they could go, I had already decided exactly where the line was. And I wasn't going to move it. They didn't come that evening. I expected headlights in the driveway, raised voices at the door, maybe even Daniel trying to smooth things over in that quiet, careful way of his. Instead, the house stayed still. The porch light clicked on at dusk, casting a soft circle over the 2 boxes I had left under the overhang. By morning, they were still there, untouched. That silence told me something had changed again, not resolved, repositioned. On Saturday, just before noon, I heard the faint scrape of metal against metal at the front door. Not a knock, not the doorbell, a key. I set down the dish I was drying and walked into the hallway. The door opened a few inches, then wider, and Megan stepped inside like she'd done it 100 times. Oh, good, you're home, she said, already slipping her sunglasses onto her head. 2 tote bags hung from her shoulder. I figured I'd get a head start downstairs. We really need to clear out space for Mom's things. She moved past me without waiting for an answer. Stop, I said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She paused halfway down the hallway, one hand already grazing the banister. She turned, brows knitting slightly, as if I'd interrupted something routine.
What?
I held out my hand. Give me the key. She blinked, then gave a short, incredulous laugh. Why? Because this isn't an emergency, I said, and you don't have permission to be here. Her expression shifted, subtle but real. The friendliness didn't disappear. It hardened. Ryan gave it to me, she said, in case something happened. Nothing happened, I replied. Give me the key. For a second I thought she might refuse. The tension sat there between us, quiet and tight. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out the key, and placed it in my palm a little harder than necessary. You're making a mistake, Evelyn, she said, her voice low, now stripped of the easy politeness she'd been using before. You're isolating yourself. No, I said, closing my fingers around the key. I'm setting a boundary. She shook her head, exhaling sharply. You're sitting here in this big house like it's a throne while your family is struggling. My mother has nowhere to go. That isn't my decision, I said, and it isn't my responsibility. Her eyes flashed. Wow. There was nothing else behind it, no argument she could shape into something reasonable. Just that one word loaded with judgment. She turned, walked straight back out the door and slammed it behind her. The sound echoed down the hallway, then dissolved into the same quiet that always followed. I stood there for a moment, the key still in my hand, then walked to the kitchen and set it on the counter. It sat there small and unremarkable, but it represented something much larger. Access. And access, once given too freely, is rarely taken back without resistance. I picked up the phone and called a locksmith. He arrived within the hour, a middle-aged man with steady hands and a quiet manner that I appreciated. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He didn't need the story. He looked at the lock, nodded once, and got to work. I stood nearby, not hovering, just present. The metallic click of tools, the measured turns, the final decisive shift as the old cylinder came loose, it all felt precise, intentional. "New set," he said, handing me 3 keys when he was done. "One for you, one spare. Third's up to you." "Thank you," I replied. After he left, I closed the door, turned the new key in the lock, and felt the mechanism settle firmly into place. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't change the structure of the house or the relationships tied to it. But it changed something fundamental. Now entry required permission again. That afternoon I drove to the bank. For years, Daniel and I had kept our finances mostly separate, but there were shared habits. One of them was the monthly support he sent Ryan, money that helped with expenses, gave them breathing room, made things a little easier. I had never interfered. It wasn't my place to tell a father how to support his son. But it was my place to decide what happened under my roof, and with anything connected to it. I sat across from the account manager, a young woman who spoke with practiced clarity and made a few adjustments. Nothing drastic, nothing that would draw attention at first glance. But enough. Enough to ensure that what was mine stayed mine. Enough to redirect certain expectations that had grown too comfortable. When I got home, the boxes were gone. I noticed it immediately, the empty space under the porch, the absence of those 2 quiet assumptions, sitting where they didn't belong. I didn't ask where they'd gone. I didn't need to. At 6:40, my phone rang. "Ryan." I answered on the second ring. "You changed the locks," he said. "Not a question." "Yes." A pause, then a short disbelieving laugh. "Seriously?" "You gave a key to someone who doesn't live here," I said. "Without asking me." "She's my wife," he shot back. "That's not someone." "In this house," I replied, "she is." Another pause. Longer. He was recalculating again. I could hear it in the silence. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said finally, but the edge in his voice had dulled slightly. "We're trying to figure things out, and instead of helping, you're shutting us out." "I'm not shutting you out," I said. "I'm deciding what I allow in." "That's the same thing," he muttered. "No," I said, "it isn't." He exhaled, frustration slipping through now. "Megan's mom already made arrangements based on this. She's packing up her place. We told her." "You told her something that wasn't yours to promise," I interrupted, still calm. "That's not on me." Silence again. This time it stretched. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. Not softer, just more controlled. "So that's it. You're just done." "With this plan," I said, "yes." "And us." I considered that for a moment, not because the answer was unclear, but because it mattered how it was said. "That depends on whether you can respect a boundary," I replied. He didn't answer right away. When he did, it wasn't with anger. "Fine," he said. "We'll talk later." The line clicked off. I set the phone down and walked into the living room. The evening light filtered in through the windows, soft and steady, touching the surfaces of things that hadn't moved, hadn't changed. The chair by the window, the table, the quiet order I'd built over years. For the first time since that afternoon, I allowed myself a small exhale. Not relief. Not victory. Just clarity. They had tried assumption, then pressure, then access. Now they would try something else. People like Ryan and Megan don't step back because they understand. They step back because they're planning the next move. That was fine. Because while they were still looking for a way in, I had already secured the door. They chose Sunday. Of course they did. Sunday had always been family day, the one predictable point in the week where expectations softened and routines opened just enough to let people in. It was strategic. Familiar ground makes people more flexible. I was in the kitchen just after noon slicing apples for a small pie I hadn't planned to make until that morning. The house was quiet, steady, the kind of quiet I'd grown used to again. When the doorbell rang, I didn't rush. I wiped my hands, folded the towel neatly, and walked to the front door. Through the glass, I saw all of them. Ryan, Megan, Daniel, and two unfamiliar shapes behind them, stacks of paper held tightly against Megan's chest. I opened the door, but I didn't step aside. Evelyn, Daniel said first, his voice cautious, almost hopeful. "We need to talk." "If you're here as guests," I replied, "you're welcome to come in. If you're here about the house, we can speak right here." Megan's lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't something we should discuss on the porch." "That depends on what you brought with you," I said, glancing briefly at the papers in her arms. Ryan shifted, his weight impatience already visible in the set of his shoulders. "Can we just come inside?" I held his gaze for a moment, then stepped back just enough to let them enter. Not an invitation, a decision. They moved into the living room, Megan placing her stack of documents carefully on the coffee table, like she was setting down something valuable. Something official. I remained standing. "Let's keep this simple," I said. "What is it?" Megan exchanged a quick glance with Ryan, then stepped forward. "We spoke with an attorney," she began, her tone measured, controlled. "There are better ways to handle property like this, ways that protect everyone and reduce long-term taxes." I didn't respond. I let her continue. "This is a draft for a living trust," she said, tapping the papers lightly. "If the house is transferred into Ryan's name now, it avoids complications later. You would retain lifetime residency, of course. Nothing would change day to day. Nothing would change. Except ownership, control, authority." Ryan stepped in, eager to reinforce it. "It's actually a really smart move, Ev. We're just trying to plan ahead. Make things easier for everyone." I looked at the papers, then back at them. Easier for who? Daniel shifted in his seat, clearing his throat again, the same unfinished sound from before. "It's just practical," he said. "We're thinking about the future." "I am the future," I replied, not sharply but firmly. "I live here now." Megan's patience thinned slightly. "No one is taking anything away from you. This is about security." "For you," I said. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "For the family." I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I walked over, picked up the top page, and scanned it, not because I needed to understand every clause, but because I wanted them to see that I wasn't dismissing it blindly. I set it back down. "No." Ryan let out a frustrated breath. "You're not even considering it." "I am," I said, "and the answer is no." Megan's composure slipped just enough. "You're being stubborn." "No," I said again, "I'm being clear." She straightened, voice tightening. "Do you have any idea what you're risking by refusing something like this probate alone?" "If you push me," I interrupted, my tone still even, "I will remove you from everything." The words landed quietly. But they landed. Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, meeting his eyes, "that this house is mine until I decide otherwise. And if I feel pressured, manipulated, or cornered, I will make arrangements that don't include you at all." Daniel looked up sharply. "Evelyn." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm not discussing this again," I continued. "Not today, not next week, not in 6 months." Megan's grip tightened on the edge of the table. "You can't just cut us out." "I can," I said. "And if you continue to treat my home like a negotiation, I will." The room went still. Ryan's expression shifted, not just frustration now, but something else. Uncertainty. The realization that the situation wasn't unfolding the way he expected. "You'd really do that?" he asked. "Yes." There was no hesitation, no softness added to it. Just the truth. Megan shook her head, a sharp, disbelieving motion. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. "We're trying to build something stable and you're hoarding space you don't even use." I held her gaze. "You've said that before. It didn't become true the second time." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're going to regret this." "Possibly," I said, "but it will be my decision to regret." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the room before stopping. "This isn't how this was supposed to go," he said under his breath. No, it wasn't. Because in his version I had already agreed. Daniel finally stood looking between us like he was searching for something to hold on to. "Maybe we should all just take a step back," he said. "Think about this with cooler heads." I'm very clear-headed, I replied. Megan gathered the papers quickly, her movements sharp, now controlled anger replacing the earlier polish. Fine, she said. We tried to do this the right way. You tried to do it your way, I said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ryan lingered for a second longer, looking at me like he was trying to reconcile two versions of the same person, the one he thought he knew, and the one standing in front of him now. Then he turned and followed Megan toward the door. Daniel paused last. Evelyn, he said quietly, this doesn't have to turn into something bigger than it is. It already has, I replied. He hesitated, then nodded once and left. The door closed behind them, softer this time, but final all the same. I stood in the living room, the space settling back into itself, the echo of their presence fading quickly. On the coffee table, a single sheet of paper had been left behind, slid out of the stack in Megan's haste. I picked it up, folded it once, and placed it in the drawer. Not as a reminder. As a record. Because moments like that, quiet, controlled, decisive, are where things change. Not all at once, but permanently. The house was quiet again after that Sunday. Not the fragile kind of quiet that feels like something is about to break, but the steady kind, the kind that settles into the walls and reminds you why you chose it in the first place. Days passed without a call, then weeks. I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't care, but because I understood something that had taken me years to learn. When people push past your boundaries, silence is sometimes the only space where they can hear themselves. I kept my routine. Morning coffee by the window, a slow walk through the garden in the afternoons. Small repairs around the house that I had been putting off, tightening a loose hinge, repainting the back railing, clearing out a closet that no longer needed to hold things just in case. There's a difference between being alone and being at peace. For the first time in a long while, I could feel that difference clearly. About 3 months later, on a cool evening, just as the light began to fade, there was a knock at the door. Not the sharp, confident knock I had come to expect. Softer, slower. I opened it to find Ryan standing there alone. He looked different. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to immediately, but enough. His shoulders were slightly slumped, the tension that usually sat in his posture replaced by something heavier. Tired, maybe. Or thoughtful in a way he hadn't been before. Hi, he said. Hi, I replied. For a moment neither of us moved, then I stepped back just enough. Come in. He entered quietly, glancing around the living room, as if seeing it more clearly this time, not as a layout to be redesigned, but as a space that already existed on its own terms. We sat across from each other the same way we had on other occasions, though the distance between us felt more honest now. Megan and I, separated, he said after a moment. There was no drama in the statement, no attempt to soften it or dress it up. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. He nodded, looking down at his hands. It wasn't just this, he added, but this didn't help. No, it hadn't. He exhaled slowly. I didn't see it at first. I thought we were just trying to make things work, be practical. But somewhere along the way it stopped being about that. I didn't interrupt. I let him find his way through it. She kept pushing, he continued. Not just here, everywhere. And I kept going along with it because it was easier than arguing, easier than saying no. He looked up, then meeting my eyes. I get it now, he said quietly. I studied him for a moment, not searching for perfection, just for sincerity. Do you? I asked. He nodded once. Yeah. The room settled into a brief silence. Outside, the last of the daylight faded, leaving the windows reflecting the interior back at us. I'm not here to ask to move in, he said almost quickly, like he wanted to make that clear before anything else. I found a small apartment. It's not much, but it's mine. That matters, I said. He gave a small, tired smile. It does. Another pause. Could I stay here for a few days, he asked then, just until I get everything sorted out. There it was. The question he hadn't asked before. Not assumed, not decided. Asked. I considered it not out of hesitation, but because the answer deserved to be deliberate. Yes, I said finally, for a few days. Relief flickered across his face, subtle but real. Thank you. But I added, and he straightened slightly, listening, this is still my house. I know, he said immediately. You don't rearrange anything. You don't invite anyone without asking. And when I say something, you listen the first time. He nodded. I understand. I held his gaze for another moment, then nodded once. Good. That night I showed him the guest room, the actual guest room, not the one he had reassigned in his mind weeks ago. He set his bag down quietly, taking in the space without commentary. There was no claiming, no planning. Just presence. Over the next few days we moved carefully around each other, not out of discomfort, but out of awareness. Conversations were simple, direct. There was no need to revisit every detail of what had happened. Some things don't need to be explained again once they've been understood. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room with a book open in my lap, Ryan paused in the doorway. I should probably head back to my place tomorrow, he said. Get settled properly. That sounds like a good idea, I replied. He hesitated. I meant what I said earlier, about understanding. I know, I said. And, I'm sorry, he added, for how I handled things, for assuming. I closed the book, setting it aside. What matters is what you do differently now. He nodded. I will. The next morning he left early. The house returned to its familiar rhythm almost immediately, the quiet, the space, the sense of everything being exactly where it was meant to be. A few weeks later he started visiting on Sundays again. Not every week, not out of obligation, just when it felt right. We'd have coffee, sometimes dinner. The conversations were easier now, not because everything had been fixed, but because the expectations had been reset. Clear, honest. Megan never came back. And that was fine. Some people remove themselves the moment they realize they can't control the outcome. That, too, is a kind of answer. One afternoon, as I stood by the front door locking it before heading out, I caught my reflection briefly in the glass. Calm, steady, unmoved. This house, these walls, this space was never just about property. It was about something quieter, something far more important. Choice. A well-timed no isn't rejection. It isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It's the decision to remain visible in your own life. If you've ever found yourself in a moment where someone else tried to decide your future for you, I'd like to know. Would you have said yes, or would you have done what I did and held your ground? Leave a comment and tell me your thoughts. And if stories like this speak to you, stories about boundaries, strength, and quiet decisions that change everything, subscribe and stay with us. There's more ahead. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to be moved.